All right, so today we're going to be talking about what is on everyone's mind, and that's coronavirus, of course. And this will be for all parents and teachers, so you don't need to know anything, special about Montessori. But before we hop, straight into coronavirus, I want to share a pretty intense story from the late D.A. Henderson. And so this was a man who, happily for all of us, he actually helped to eventually eradicate the disease of smallpox. So I'll explain why I'm sharing this afterward, but just be warned, his story, it's graphic. Okay, here we go. Quote, "It was hideous and unforgettable. For me, the memory of a ward full of smallpox victims 35 years ago in Dhaka, Bangladesh, is still vividly etched in my mind. Anxious, pleading, pock-deformed faces. The ugly, penetrating odor of decaying flesh that hung over the ward. The hands covered with pustules, reaching out as people begged for help. Neither water nor food offered comfort. Pus-filled lesions covered the insides of their mouths, making it painful for them to even chew or swallow. Flies were everywhere, thickly clustered over eyes half closed by the pustules. More than half the patients were dying, and there was no drug, no treatment that we could give to help them." End of quote. Okay, so I raised this here, at the beginning of a discussion on the coronavirus, not to gross you out and definitely not to scare anyone, but rather so that we all have, a pretty strong example of when things go really bad, which we are nowhere near with the coronavirus, as I think, contrasts like this can be helpful in life. So what we're experiencing is really serious. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we're on like a kind of almost like a worldwide lockdown, but it's important in my view to always keep in mind the context of just how far we've come as human beings. Okay, so enough with the abstract. Let's get down to the really practical, what we'll actually be focused on today. So first, what is the coronavirus in like simple, clear language? Second, how do I talk with children about it? And then third, what to do when children are out of school and basically at home for weeks. So what's occurring right now? And joining me in today's discussion with all this is Doug Peltz, and he's better known by children around the world as Mystery Doug. So Doug is, interestingly enough, a former colleague of mine. He's a longtime friend whom I just really cherish, and he is a celebrity online science teacher. And I mean that for real. Like, he is seriously an idol to thousands and thousands and thousands of children. So his work and videos at mystery.org, which help to keep kids super curious, are literally seen by millions every week. Also very relevant here, Doug is a husband and father of 2 girls, age 4 and 8, who both attend Montessori school. So that is a quick intro to Mystery Doug and also to what we'll be doing today. And with that, let's hop in. All right, Doug Peltz. I'm happy to have you on, Doug.
Jesse, happy to be here.
Nice. So I gave a little explanation about who you are beforehand, but I just wanted to, I remember this must have been a few years ago when you were telling me the early stories about when children would recognize you, but adults wouldn't because of what you do. Can you just give me one of those examples or,
I mean, it happens pretty regularly now, and it's a little weird because it's like every week we'll put out a new episode. Kids all around the world will see it. So I'll be out and about, with my family getting dinner out or something, and a child will recognize me and run up and be excited. But their parent, of course, this is something they watch at school. So their parent is just like, who is this guy? The kids are running up to me and I'm having to awkwardly wave and explain who I am.
I love it. And Doug, I mean, I said it before, but Doug and I go way back and we've always had some fun experiences. So I love hearing his story. So I thought, let's get him on here. And obviously this guy, in terms of explaining science, I say obviously, but for me, he's just such a down to earth explainer of things. And I always come back to him, even calling him every now and again, say, hey, can you explain this to me in a simple way? But anyway, so on here, I'm thinking, just starting out, what the heck is the coronavirus? I mean, in a simple terms, even going back to like a virus or germ, like what is it?
Right. And I know you're asking me too, like, how do I think about explaining it to my kids and children I speak to generally? And it's like, it's one of these terms, a virus, for it's 2 very different things if you're going to talk to kids or you're going to talk to grownups based on what knowledge they have. But For a lot of kids, one thing that I like to remind adults of is if your children are curious about what even is a virus, it's sort of an aha moment for them to even know that different illnesses are caused by different kinds of germs and that there are different kinds of germs. So I usually start there when I'm talking to kids. And it's funny, as I went to think about this the other day, like talking to my 8-year-old, I realized fortunately we live in this world where there are very few illnesses that I've been fortunate that my 8-year-old even knows. So I was explaining to her there's the flu, you've had a cold before, the symptoms are a little bit different. She's had a stomach flu, and so we've kind of talked about the difference between a stomach flu and flu. And so it was a big aha moment for her to realize, oh, you're telling me that scientists have discovered that each of those is caused by a different kind of germ. And so with a virus, once you're an adult and you've, acquired some knowledge about the living world, you know something about cells and the fact that all living things, plants, animals, you name it, are made of cells, and our cells reproduce constantly. Viruses are weird. They're within the category of germs or microscopic living things that can harm us. Viruses are very unusual in that they're not even cells. And some biologists debate about whether to consider them alive at all. What's really weird about a virus, now this context is probably too much for a kid, but is that they're almost like a little particle, a microscopic particle that reproduces only by getting inside of your cells and then sort of hijacking the machinery inside of your cells to make copies of itself. And
now, are you making this distinction because, like, if it's a cell on its own, it's kind of growing on its own, but this virus needs a cell to grow?
Right, as a host, exactly. Okay. And there are other germs that are cells. Bacteria are germs that are cells, but a lot of the diseases that we're dealing with, on a day-to-day basis are often caused by viruses. Flu is caused by virus. Coronavirus obviously is a type of virus. The common cold, and so on.
Yeah, and one thing, I mean, thinking back to you, because I know when we were teaching together, I had covered the bubonic plague. So it's just to see the differences, because you had said we're lucky today, but the significance of like those illnesses or diseases back in the day were so huge as compared to things that we might face today. So I just find now, but the bubonic plague or the Black Death, would that be in a similar category? It's just as, like, say, the coronavirus, or where do you put those?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's a good case here where as an adult and you know more about the different kinds of germs, you can make this distinction between two major categories within germs. Viruses are one big category. Bacteria are another. They are actually cells unto themselves, and they can reproduce on their own. They don't have to hijack your cells. And a lot of those diseases, you mentioned the plague, things like salmonella, when we get food poisoning, leprosy, strep throat, those are caused by bacteria. And it's not that they're not a problem, we still have them, but the development of antibiotics, which is only less than 100 years old, has really made a dent. Antibiotics treat bacterial diseases. And so it's been only very recently that we've started to have medicines that are antiviral medicines to combat viruses. And it's a lot harder. I mean, with coronavirus, part of what makes this trickier is that it can't be treated by known antibiotics or antiviral medicines.
Yeah. And you had a video recently that you put out. I think it's called "How Do Germs Get Inside Your Body?" Did I say that right?
That's right.
And I mean, that's for children.
Yeah.
That's for children. But as I tell Doug, like I find these videos fascinating because he puts this kind of seemingly complex stuff down to a very simple, formula, or at least a simple explanation of it. And one of the things I love was this slow motion video of people sneezing. So, if you can't see this, but what on the video that Doug had, like it's literally people slow-mo and sneezing and the stuff coming out of their nose. I mean, it's kind of gross talking about it, but is that like a normal sneeze that I was looking at, or is that like, big time somebody's sick and all this mucus is coming out or something?
All of those were normal sneezes, just slowed down into slow motion. And the thing, when you watch it, right, it's cringeworthy to watch because the people asked to sneeze in these videos are purposely not covering their mouth in any way. But I wanted to include that in a video for children, and it's how do germs enter your body, just to give them a sense of adults in their life are constantly saying, cover your mouth when you sneeze, cover your mouth when you cough, wash your hands. And so the purpose of that video was to really give them a sense of why adults are always saying this, and also to give them a little sense of control, that there is something in all this that is in their control. And so to lessen the anxiety a bit about what's going on. One of the things that was surprising to a lot of people in that video is I made the point in the video that many germs, most of the ones that cause these things we've been worried about, like flu and coronavirus, get in through your eyes, your nose, and your mouth. So, in the video, we left it open to kids, like, where do you think germs get in at first? And we've heard a lot of kids when just asked that, they guess, I don't know, maybe it gets in through your skin. And so it's very surprising to find out it's not just through your skin, it's through these openings. And so this is why the grownups in your life are always saying, wash your hands, cover your mouth. Like you actually do have some measure of control over this.
And I didn't even think about that fact about that children will have control over this. Like it gives them a sense that, I can stop things or change things. So I love that you're pointing that out. What I'm going to do is I'll link that to everybody who's listening so you can see that. And I think based on that point that you had just mentioned, I'm highlighting again, is that have your children watch this, because it does give them a sense as opposed to like nagging mom or nagging dad or nagging teacher, cover your nose. This be like, well, look at that. That's actually what's coming out, Right. So I think that's huge. I think that's really huge.
It's the sense of control. And it's just also finally knowing, conceptually, why are people saying that? It's so easy. As adults, we're always telling them what to do. And it's easy for us to lose sight of if we're not saying why this is true. And it's a case where you really have to see the slow-mo sneeze, for example. Yeah. So many teachers, after we showed that video, wrote us to say, my kids totally got it. They were all washing their hands all week. And
But that's a great example of what I was saying here, is that like germs are pretty abstract when you just say germs or whatever, or even cells for sure. But you show this video and it's like, I don't want that all over me, whatever. I mean, even though it might not be that bad, it's like, if something's in there that could harm me, I'm going to cover my mouth. I'm going to cover my nose. So yeah. Now, the one thing I did want to really get into with you is that you have, two daughters of your own. I remember going, by the way, Doug, I don't remember, but I went to the hospital with Mira when she was born.
You were one of the first people to meet her.
It's crazy. And that's like 8 years ago. But anyways, I'm raising it because you have two daughters of your own. I know I have to imagine you talked with them. I talked a little bit with you about this, but how did you explain or talk with your own kids about what was going on with all this, with the coronavirus?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. In the community of parents around where I am, I think I tend to be someone who I'm more reticent to talk about grown-up topics with my kids. I know a lot of friends who don't hesitate to talk about political issues with their kids. And I was always a big fan too. Growing up, my parents were adamant that they were not going to talk to me about any sort of political views, because they had this view of that's what enabled me to think independently. And, I think there are different approaches to this, but it served me well. So a few weeks ago, I remember thinking, I don't want to talk to my kids about this. I don't want to panic them. I don't want them to be worried. I was concerned that it's just kind of too abstract. But there came a point for me where, and I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, so a little ahead of the curve in terms of what the rest of the country was experiencing, where it was starting to get a little more real, even a week before the events of this past week, where I feel like now, where the NBA is canceling. And so I knew that my kids were aware. I started by being curious. So, and that's one piece of advice I've seen floating around I think is really good, is just like, first of all, to just check in with your kids. Just, so with my own kids, it was like, what are you noticing? Have you heard of the coronavirus? Mm-hmm. Are you, what have you heard? What do you wonder about it? And how does it make you feel? I was surprised that my kids didn't report feeling worried or anxious.
I should stop. Doug, what's really cool about what you just said, by the way, is my question was like, how did you explain this to your kids? And you flipped it and you're like, I was just asking them questions. So normally as adults, and particularly as we're the parents or we're the teachers, we feel like a lot of us feel the need to tell them what's up, as opposed to asking, hey, well, have you heard anything about this? So I think that's cool to begin with. Just want to throw that out.
It's got this added benefit to it as well, which is it's really easy for us to be miscalibrated on what they know and to accidentally overwhelm them. And so by checking in like that, it gives you input right away of like, oh, this is where they're at. Like I found out in this case, my 8-year-old had heard all kinds of things and actually was a little anxious, I think. Whereas my 4-year-old knew nothing about it at all.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool, the way that you were just asking questions. I think that's in line with, do you guys still have the tagline "Stay Curious" for history? Okay,
yeah.
Awesome. So where did it lead to when you approached it in that kind of curious, questioning way?
Once I knew where they were at, what I had started to realize was everything around us was changing. Things were not normal. My children were seeing a lot more people wearing face masks. I'm sure that the teachers and assistant teachers at the school had like looks of anxiety on their face and were concerned and may have been talking about it, may have been on their phones a little more than usual. Mm-hmm. And so what I decided was like, okay, I need to just there's always that risk that if you don't say something, then kids read into it when they know that there's something going on. And so for me, it was just to acknowledge that the reality of what they're seeing, like everything around us is not normal right now. Things are different. Like people are a little worried right now. And then to state a little bit more. And I got into, there is this virus. It started in China. It has spread. Qualifying it right away with, we're very fortunate in this situation that this is a picture we can present to kids as like, you're not in immediate danger. It doesn't seem to be having really bad effects on kids. It seems to be no worse than having like the flu with children. Mm-hmm. So like we're not worried about you. We're not worried about me, but it's something that affects older people particularly bad. And just that the reason everyone's a little nervous is because we've never dealt with this before. And we're all trying to make a decision about what should we do, because if it spreads around quickly, older people that we know and care about could get ill and the hospitals could get filled up. And so I just kind of left that hanging there. And then they had questions about that. But it was, the first part of this was just acknowledging the reality that things are not normal, mm-hmm. letting them see that I knew that. I should add too, like I went into this conversation calm. There have definitely been moments where I've been more anxious about all of it. And if you're a parent and you feel anxious, it's probably good to like find your calm before you
chill
talk
out
about
for
this.
A little bit.
Right.
So two things that jump out to me the way that you're speaking about this is, one is that you're kind of involving children in the idea that even as adults, we have to problem solve issues. Like we don't have all the answers right on hand at any moment in life.
Right.
And I just feel like there's with some parents, there's a need. And I remember this as an early teacher, I felt like I have to know everything and I have to be on it at every moment. And it's just so phony and the kids are facing difficulties every day. They come up against something they have to figure out. So I think it's like super relatable to say, hey, yeah, we as adults, we have things that come up that we don't know all the answers to, and we're trying to work it out. So even the way that you're kind of approaching it, to me, just makes a lot of sense in terms of child development. So I think that's huge. And then the second point about anxiety is that we don't want to go in like crazy anxiety. Oh my God, it's kind of crazy. Or the opposite, which is like, you have nothing to worry about. The world is amazing. We could solve anything. And it's just over the top. But it's kind of, you do want to get yourself in a mode where you're not like, you didn't just watch and learn about Tom Hanks and you're devastated because he's your favorite person or something like that. And you go and talk to your kids.
Right. Well, and I will say, like, soon as you get into acknowledging the details of this, where it's like, yeah, things are not normal right now. People are worried. And let me tell you why. The nice thing about this situation is like the reason we're worried, the reason we're pausing and hesitating and asking ourselves, should we take drastic action? And now in many cases, we are beginning to take action. Mm-hmm. It has a really positive tone to it. So with my own kids, I leaned into that, which is, the reason that we're doing this right now is because we think that this will help us to take control of the situation and to do good. We think that by closing the schools right now, it's going to help the older people in our lives and it's going to help the hospitals not get overwhelmed. And so that's why we're staying home right now. And, it's even been, I've noticed here at home now, we're only granted 2 days into school closure right now. So I may feel differently in 2 weeks, but my kids, even as they get a little bored or antsy, I've heard both of them say, like, remind themselves, but we're doing this right now to help make sure that doctors aren't overwhelmed, hospitals don't get filled up. So is that sense of control again?
Yeah, and then they're a part of it. It's not, adults are doing everything. It's they're actually with us doing it.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And, and obviously you wouldn't say this to the children, but I know I mentioned this to you yesterday about there's a sense in which children aren't really affected by this in terms of, it's not harming children physically.
Right.
But I had mentioned to you yesterday, like, I think, and again, this is not something I would tell to the children, but I'm just raising it that I grew up with a grandfather whom I loved. And it was just such a great experience to have his influence, but both bad and good, because he was a little hard ass in some ways. But I can only imagine if I had lost my grandpa at like 3 or 4 or 7 or 8 even years old, or even 14. So when I had to make a decision recently to decide not to go, I was speaking at a conference and I decided not to go. And one of the things I sat back and thought was, I'm not really concerned about myself. I'm healthy. I'm fairly young, but I thought, man, if I contributed in any way towards, people near me or there being seriously ill or potentially dead, and I could do this small thing to stop that, I thought this is huge for me. So it wasn't like, oh, screw everything in my life, I'm going to help, the community. It was more like, it's really meaningful to me. So anyways, I just wanted to make that note that this does affect children in that sense, because children are going to actually lose grandparents over this, or grandmothers, grandfathers, and possibly parents. So although it doesn't affect them physically, like literally, I think it does affect them, So I just wanted to throw that out there as a point. I think we discussed yesterday, and you mentioned this with your own grandfather as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So.
Yeah. I mean, for my own children, they have 2 living great grandparents, both in retirement communities that have been locked down, and so we've talked about this. And it's. I mean, it's funny. I think there's a couple things I've noticed in the last few days that. And parents can take this in different directions depending on your own values and what's important for you and stressing with your kids. With my kids, the tone that was important for me to strike was, we're doing this to take charge of a situation. So there's that sense of just like where otherwise could feel really anxiety inducing, and there's something that's really unknown and new and worrisome. Well, here's these actions we can take. Kind of like I said with the How Do Germs Enter Your Body video, like here's these actions we can take. And so it gives you that sense of being in charge. The one thing I leaned on with my own kids, last night we stayed in the car. We went out and grabbed carry-out food. I'm not sure how much longer we can do this, but we stayed in the car. And as we went out, we saw a few people wearing masks and so on. And it was nice to lean in as well to the sense of coming together. So just talking about that, it's not just us, right? All of our neighbors are staying inside. All our friends are staying inside. People in these other neighborhoods we're driving by that we don't even know, they're staying inside. And it struck, especially with my 8-year-old, I think this sense of like, to bring her in a little bit into this feeling that a lot of us as adults are experiencing right now, which is the whole country is coming together. The whole world's coming together, right?
Yeah, it's that connectedness. Although we're separate, we might be in our own homes or in our own cars, we're all experiencing something very similar. And I'm with you. Like, I think as much as people are talking about how all the toilet paper is gone and people are going nuts in the stores and so forth, I felt somewhat of the opposite when I interact with people, where there's a sense of community or a connection. So I like what you're getting at there.
Yeah, and don't like, if that's important to you, extend it to your children, because I notice with my own kids, like, they're not too young to feel that and see it and take pride in that.
Yeah. So on that note of being stuck in the car, or maybe stuck in the house in the future, what are you guys planning to? I know it's early. I mean, I think most schools are going to be shut down Monday. So that's when everything's kind of hit. And as you said, this is the early days, so there still might be some excitement around this. But a week and a half later, I know there's going to be some difficulties with the parents. So what are you planning to do, you and Carrie, your wife, with the kids? What's your approach with all this, during this quote lockdown or the school closures?
I mean, for us, we're both fortunate enough to be able to not be worried about our work. We both are going to have work and income coming in. And I know that's not true for everyone. And we're also fortunate enough that we can work remotely. Both of us sat down last night and it's like, okay, we're going to have to divide and conquer just to preserve our sanity. Like, we're going to have to divide and conquer. Like, there's, I think, sort of sharing duties and making sure, like, as partners, we're not like resenting each other over anything. So just making it really explicit. And I have been thinking about this, and I think structure is going to matter a lot. I noticed with my 4-year-old, even as I just worked from home yesterday, we were fortunate enough to have a babysitter be able to come for a little bit. And the 4-year-old was already just like very upset, and she came back into the room where I was and and needed a hug. And I saw in that moment, like, oh, there's that normalcy that she, like, all of a sudden she's not at school, right? And it's supposed to be a school day. So I think having a structure, having predictability as much as possible. But I've thought about too, like, I think living in a city, it's possible that, I mean, right now we're not wanting to go out, but I think it's very possible, especially if things go the way of Italy, that we may not have the option of going out. We may literally be stuck in our own home. And I know it's going to take creativity to, like, I have thought of already, like, well, maybe we're going to set up a tent in the basement and we're going to have a camp out one night, like anything where it's going to come, especially if this is weeks. I fear that the kids are just going to be so stir crazy and so bored. And thank God for social media, Jesse, because I'm like, I already have seen so many great ideas being shared, and I think we're going to see a lot of parents starting to come together and pool ideas.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this and because I normally don't talk about what's going on, current affairs and stuff, but obviously this is huge, is to get some ideas out there. And I'm just curious, you're thinking that San Francisco might go on lockdown where you could not get in your car and, let's say, go to, what is it, Presidio? Like, you couldn't go out into nature, is what you're saying.
I mean, at this stage, I say that. I think most people think I'm crazy, but I'm just going on that based on when I look at the chart of the growth curve of this, we're on the same path as Italy. So I'm right now taking the view of, like, well, if we're 10 or 11 days behind Italy, I'm keeping my eyes on the Italian news, and that's what's going on there right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult. Italy's about the size of like California, so it's
right.
I mean, I agree with the seeing the stats because numbers don't lie. But I'm curious if San Francisco would go on lockdown to that extreme, because then it's really difficult, because then you can't get out with your kids. Which, as you said, like having a tent in the basement's going to be fun, but man, after a week and a half not going outside, that's tough. And when you say kind of, let's say this tent in the basement or so forth like that, like, if you're literally on lockdown in your own house, I've got to imagine you guys are thinking, like, okay, we need to, like, for a few hours, I just go in the room alone, then we switch off. So you at least have some alone time, right? I mean, that would be some in the planning, right?
Yeah. I mean, my wife and I both talked about the need for absolute autonomy as we work. Like, you can't have one kid coming back and saying, but I want to talk to you right now, like, just for purpose of concentration. But you're raising a good point too, which I'm not, honestly, it's so early, I've not even thought this through. And as you say, it's so right, which is just for our own mental health and happiness. Like, we're all going to need alone time. So to figure out if you have a partner that can share, if you don't, to find somebody in your life that could possibly help out, whether it's through FaceTime, online video services. I think we're going to see, you hate to talk about the silver lining in any of this, but I think we're going to see a lot of creativity in the next few weeks. A lot. I think parents are going to come together and share. I already see it in the education community. It's just amazing how quickly teachers, education companies, districts just like started Facebook groups. I've seen Google Docs like went up overnight and just like put lists together of like possible schedules, free resources. It's been incredible.
Yeah, and as you say that, I was talking with Alessandra yesterday, my wife, and Doug knows this, but and we were talking about this, and I thought, how cool would it be, like, particularly like in Montessori in these classrooms when it's like 3 to 6 year olds, where they're not going to have like essays being written and you're talking with your teacher online, like they're just not going to have that. But what if the teacher came and just said, okay, everybody call in at this hour, and we're all going to have an interaction, and it'd be so cool at home to see your teacher. So I agree with technology. There's so many possibilities today. So I think I'm with you. It's going to be fun. I just know in terms of parents, all of us as individuals, for life to change that quickly and to be in one confined area, even if you're not completely set in your house, you can go out. It's just going to be, the creativity is going to happen in the house, and in particular around, boundaries in terms of, I think you mentioned this yesterday and we chatted really briefly about, if you're planning that you're going to get all this work done at home, that's fine and all, but maybe think I'll probably get about 50% of that done, or something like that, so that you're more realistic about how much work you can actually get done at home. Do you remember talking about that?
Yeah. Well, and it's one of these where it depends a lot on the culture of the organization that you're part of. But as much as possible to start this conversation with coworkers, with your boss, like like for me, I'm in a position where I can influence this. And I realized the other day, I was talking to a coworker, we were both kind of beating ourselves up that like, oh, we didn't get as much done today as we wanted to. We felt like we were just constantly watching the news. And if we weren't watching the news, we were just, our head was off in la la land. And it's like, this is a major historical event. Nothing like this has happened in our lifetimes. And it's like to cut yourself the slack of like, hey, you're going to look back on this. Like, of course, you're not going to get as much work done the first day that this is happening, the first week that this is setting in. And then now for a lot of parents to be saddled with having to be working and now suddenly a homeschool parent. Like I think if you can give yourself the slack and cut yourself the slack to just be forgiving and take it easy, that you're not going to get as much done.
Yeah. And I think that's a cool mindset to have throughout this whole thing. And in line with that too is I've already heard parents kind of starting to be concerned about my child's going to lose out on academics for 2 weeks or potentially more. And just to get, I know we've talked about this in the past, and with Montessori, there's been a big sense of that, living life is really what you're doing. So you don't have to, it's not necessarily that parents have to now be doing like math worksheets with their children. So I'm curious, like, what's your take on that in terms of, quote, academics at home as a parent now? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's early, so I think I can see where I can say something now, and I can see where I can feel differently in 2 weeks. But just like I'm cutting myself slack this week, like, okay, I'm not going to accomplish all I thought I was going to accomplish on Monday. I feel like I have to allow for the fact that my children are not going to get as rich and structured and rigorous an academic experience as they were otherwise going to get at school. But I like you raise a really good point, Jesse, which is there's all these, just to look at it the other way, which is what's the opportunity in all this? I mean, now they're home. So what's the learning that can happen? And now when provided you can manage to, you and your, spouse can manage to structure time that one of you is going to be with the kids while the other is doing some work, like, well, now you have like really one-on-one time, parent and child. So what's the learning experience you might have? For me, I love science, and I really don't get enough time with my 4-year-old to do science experiments and encourage her to explore things. She's interested in birds right now. We have a little bit of a backyard, so I'm like, thinking about, well, what kind of like, when I look at this with the lens of what does it afford me? What does it give me? Like all of a sudden now I've been blessed with this opportunity of I can take her in the backyard and we could do some sort of science experiment. We could look at birds every week. So, but again, there, I think it's to give yourself the time, because that involves a lot of creative thinking. And I know for me to even come up with some of those ideas, I've got to give myself enough space to get away from the stress and the anxiety that I think a lot of us are feeling right now of just like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next?
Yeah. And I think you raising that, acknowledging the emotions that we're having right now, which is, that is heavy anxiety, heavy stress. I know there's a lot of parents out there like, what am I going to do if I don't have this money for the next 2 weeks? So there's all sorts of additional stress, but, and I'm with you. And I just want to emphasize that this is small things that, like you're saying, science experiments, but I know that there's parents out there that love building things, woodworking in the house. I know I just went out, I mean, this is kind of small, but I think it's the type of stuff, like I went out and got a plant. So I got a succulent and I thought, man, this would be cool to have here. And then with parents that don't have small living animals or small plants in the house, there's so much to be gained by buying something with your child and then going through that at home, just whether you were looking at books online. So it's just not the traditional sense of academics, but there's so much learning. And as you said, turning this around to something positive at home with your child. Again, it's stressful, but this could be such a huge opportunity. So I'm with you there. Well, anything else, Doug? I know we've gotten through kind of a bunch here, but is there anything else on this topic, coronavirus, anything that you're talking with this group right now that you want to share? Whatever.
Let me think about that, Jess. Hold on.
Go for it.
It's funny, as you and I both talk about this, I'm just like, wow, everything has been so unprecedented every day. It's like I've literally never had this experience before. I went to the grocery store this morning and like I had to stop shopping because I couldn't move to get through the aisles because the grocery store was that packed.
Wow.
So every day is just a completely unprecedented experience. I'll say the little like hope and excitement I have even is thank God for the internet, because I feel like like I said, seeing the outpouring of generosity and collaboration that's already happening among educators and between educators and parents this past week, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I know I'm going to rely on that in terms of like getting other creative ideas of what to be doing with my kids.
Yeah.
I also have noticed, like, I don't know about you, Jesse, but like the last few days, relying on a lot of friends messaging with memes and funny gifs.
Yeah. You know,
It's powerful.
yeah, and you know what? I mentioned something like this. I think I told you last night that the guy who first got in the NBA, like a
Yeah.
couple days before, he had literally, I don't know if you people out there have seen this, but he literally was joking around, didn't know he had, the coronavirus, but he had, after one of the press conferences, he touched all of his teammates' mics as a joke. So it's like, we forget that when looking back, it's easy to say that's ridiculous, but in the moment, it doesn't seem that kind of crazy, So, the memes are so much more lighthearted and they're kind of fun, like the toilet paper memes and so forth. So I'm with you. I think we need to remember that we also have to enjoy this time in some way amongst each other. I don't know what word I'd use for that. I mean, do you have a sense of what you would even call that? But camaraderie? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it's the same. It's this camaraderie. It's probably in the same bucket of just all of us also feeling like we're coming together to try to stop the spread of this thing for the greater good of everyone. I mean, for our own loved ones in our lives, and for our own lives. God forbid if we have to go to the hospital. Just the whole all of society right now. So yeah, it might be in just that general bucket. I will say I love me some toilet paper memes. So part of me, as you say, it's like when we hang up, I want to go like start a toilet paper meme Facebook group because I've seen some really good ones.
Yeah, and I think if you were to lose that playfulness, I think we'd be in deep, deep trouble. So I'm, raising that here is huge. And even with the kids, having fun with it all. I mean, I would hate to be in a family right now that's kind of freaking out and like the kids are feeling the craziness, and it's just the approach that it seems that you're taking with your kids and just generally in life just seems to be very, very productive and helpful. Not only to the own kids, but since you're, Mystery Doug to the world in a way. So thanks.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks for having me on.
Yep. Take care, Doug.
All right. Coming out of that discussion with Doug, I want to just phrase a few quick notes. So first, early on, I mentioned a recent video Doug and mystery.org released called How Do Germs Get Inside of Your Body? So if you have 5 minutes between now and, I don't know, whenever, I'd say watch that with your children. And it really doesn't matter what age they are. It's just such a simple and good video. It's going to be good for anybody. Again, I enjoyed it and I learned from it. So I'll put a link to that on the episode page, which will be at montessorieducation.com/coronavirus. Second, there is an episode of the Montessori Education podcast literally called Montessori at Home. And this is all about what you can do with children outside of school. So that should be helpful too. So I'll link to it on the episode page as well. And then lastly, I'm going to share a couple of resources about the coronavirus that I personally found really helpful when I was trying to sift through, all the information and of course misinformation out there about the virus. So I'll put these links on the episode page as well, but just note they're really only for those who want to dive deep into understanding this thing. So in other words, they're not easy reading or easy listening, right? Okay. Overall, I'd say just another huge thanks to Mystery Doug for coming on, and for all of you out there. I mean, cheers to, the parents and teachers that you guys are getting prepped for this new coronavirus style of life. And it's definitely going to be an interesting ride. And thinking about that on that note, I'm just, like a few days from now, or maybe a week or two, say you find yourself frustrated with a child for whatever reason. I imagine it's going to happen if you are going to be in the house with your spouse, with your children for a long time. Like that's bound to happen. A while back, I found a passage by Dr. Maria Montessori talking about this. I found it so awesome. So I want to share it with you guys. So here she is in the book, The Absorbent Mind. Quote, "I have myself sometimes been too severe with a child." End of quote. So it's just so wild to hear Dr. Montessori say that. So I think it's good for all of us to remind ourselves that you're bound to get frustrated, and it happens, right? Anyhow, that is it for now. And I'm actually going to close up with our normal podcast intro, weirdly enough, as I think it kind of fits well with today's discussion.
So take care, everyone, and adios. The educator Dr. Maria Montessori once said,
"The child developing harmoniously and the adult improving himself at his side make a very exciting and attractive picture."
Welcome to Montessori Education with me, Jesse McCarthy, where we talk raising children and educating students while bettering ourselves right alongside them.